Okay. All right, so I still cannot get a PowerPoint loaded into Collaborate, even though I reported it before Christmas. So I've got Collaborate running in case anybody dials in live. They can at least see me and hear me. And I don't know what else to do, really. I'm not sure whether I can bring that Collaborate picture up. I don't think I can while we're in the PowerPoint. I guess I can do the PowerPoint. I could do the PowerPoint like that. It's not very brilliant, but that way at least we'd be able to see if someone comes in. No, you know what, guys? If you come in, just yell and we'll find you, because this is not going to work very well. Okay, and I'm going to have to keep dashing backwards and forwards and checking the battery on the camera because that's been giving me trouble this week. It's just techie nightmares. As Brian says, I shouldn't be allowed near any technology, really. Okay, so I apologise for last week. That was just not working last week. Okay, and so today we'll do last week's lecture. Hopefully everybody saw my email. We're just going to bump down. I put up a new schedule, and the practice article summary will be due by 11 o'clock on Monday. If you already submitted one, thank you very much for trying, but without the explanation, that probably won't have gone so well. So I set it up so that anyone who had already submitted one could submit a second one. So after today's explanation of what goes in those boxes on the template, you can have another go and submit a second attempt. Okay, so we're going to have a brief intro about what the class is about, really. We'll look at the syllabus. I'll talk you through, hopefully Blackboard is relatively obvious, but I'll talk you through Blackboard, and then we'll have a talk about plagiarism and starting on the APA, the dreaded APA manual. So, I need you to make sure that you read the syllabus thoroughly, all right? And there's a discussion board up with ask questions, so if you read it and there's anything you're not sure about, drop a discussion board in, and then I can answer it and everybody can see it. The texts that you want are this one. Hopefully you've got them since we're late starting. With any luck, everybody's got the textbook already. This research methods book is the most straightforward book to read. It has some very useful information, but it's not real difficult language. It's not very tech speak, so it's very easy to read for those of you that don't have a research background. I tried to pick a book that was as simple as possible to use. I think there's only 2 or 3 of you who are using, maybe only 2 of you now if you're going to upgrade to the 7th edition. So if anybody is using the 6th edition from last semester and retaking the class, let me know. I'm learning. I've got a cheat sheet for the new 7th edition, but I've got some other websites to go and have a look at. So I'm trying to learn the changes in the 7th edition. There seem to be several that will impact, in particular, our referencing. That looks a little bit different. So when I am grading things, if you think I've made a mistake on APA, please let me know, because it's highly possible that I'm going to get these two manuals muddled up for a while. So just, drop me an email or something and say, would you mind checking? And I can double check anything like that. All right? So I am collaborating this, but the PowerPoint isn't embedded, but you'll get a picture of the classroom. Most distance students tell me that the audio on Collaborate is not great, but the audio on the YouTube video is very good. So I will be videoing, hopefully if the battery lasts, I'll be videoing the class, and then after class I will download that to YouTube. Depending how long the download takes, that will either be available tonight or tomorrow morning. Okay? So you can keep up with the information from class. I strongly suggest you do that, because I give a lot of explanation of things in class, which if you're a distance student and you don't get, you won't know how to do things. Okay? So please try to keep up with the lectures. Okay, let's see if we can have a quick look at the Blackboard page so I can show everyone right there. Alright, so I put the textbooks up way before Christmas, so as I said, I hope everybody has those. Please note that if you are not in town, final presentations the last 2 weeks of school are live. So you need to make sure that you're available to dial in through Collaborate to give your presentation and to peer review your classmates. And the new schedule is also on the home page that I did the other day. So everything with regards to the running of the class is here. You can't see that one. The assignment tab is over here. The lecture meetings classroom is over here, and the class notes, email messages, and apparently I forgot the discussion board, so I will put the discussion board up. Class notes are organized by week. Why can you not see that? Could you not see week 1 when you went in?
Yeah, I saw it.
You saw it? Why is it showing as hidden? Okay, well, let me make that available. These should all be available. Okay, I will have to fix that as well. So they're organized by week. Week 1 will have today's lecture, and it'll also tell you what reading to do for next week to make sure that you're ready. In the lecture meetings tab, this archived, and again, see, this is so, oh, I know why that's not showing, because I've got to make, when I download today, I have to make a new folder in YouTube. So there's an archived live lectures there. When you click on that link, it's a web link, it will take you directly into YouTube to the folder that has this semester's lectures archived. Okay? And you don't need the rest of this stuff yet, so don't worry about that for now. And then under assignments, so there's a folder there that has APA online. I haven't found a voice thread for the 7th edition yet. I did look, but I couldn't find one. If you go to the apa.org website, there's piles of useful information there. So just, if you're struggling with the book, Purdue is usually a good resource. Purdue OWL is a good resource, and as I said, the APA.org is a great resource. They've got even more, but the new book has many more examples in it than the previous edition. It is also a lot more user-friendly because it has tabs, so it's going to be much easier to find things. It's only taken them 7 years to get it out. So I'm much happier so far with the new one. The ENMU Writing Centre is available for help with grad students. Whether you're on campus or off campus, you can use that resource for help with your writing if you're struggling. The article summaries are in here. You should be able to see the practice articles still. I changed the dates on that. And once that one's due, the next one opens up for you to be able to read. I think I open it up at 6 o'clock in the morning of the Monday, and the summary from the week before is due at 11. So if you get your summary done early, the next article will be available for you to start reading. If you have any questions on any of this, as I said, I will put up a discussion board. Just please, if it's a question about content or how to do something, use the board so everyone can see the answer. Obviously, if it's a personal question, email me through Blackboard, please. Don't email me in Outlook. You may not get an answer because my Outlook is a nightmare. All right? All the folders in the assignments reflect things that are in the syllabus, so you shouldn't have any problem trying to tie up what's due when. And as you can already probably tell, I am technologically challenged. So if something doesn't open and you're expecting it to be open, please let me know, because it probably means I've made yet another mistake in Blackboard, because that happens a lot. Okay. All right, so research. People often think, oh, research, that's like difficult and it's scary, and it isn't at all. Research is fun and fascinating and really the most interesting thing you get to do. And everything we do in life really is research at some level, right? I mean, if you pick up 2 different brands of baked beans and you read the ingredients list to see which one you want to buy, that's research, right? It is. All research does, or is wanting to find something out. Okay? So try to approach this semester as a window opening into this vast world of knowledge that is just never ending, and it never stops. And once you get into it and you start, it just becomes really a passion, and it's fascinating to start digging around and finding things that you're interested in. All right? Why do we do or read it? Well, in particular, as a grad student, you have to be able to manipulate research. All right? You may or may not run a research project at some time during your grad school career, depending on the classes that you take. You may or may not choose to write a thesis at the end of your graduate work to graduate. All right? So you might do some research of your own, or you might not, but you still need to be able to find, read, interpret, research for your papers that you write in your classes. Okay? No graduate degree is worth its salt if you don't have to research good peer-reviewed research in order to write papers and answer questions. So we use it because it expands our understanding of things, right? people write research because they've done a project and it's exciting and they want to share that with other people who are interested in that idea. And it sometimes has an end goal. So you might, as I said, you might be doing a project for part of a class as credit in that class. You might do it as a final thing, as a degree requirement, particularly if you move on to a PhD or EDD type program. Or it could be a professional requirement if you're a teacher or a faculty member, or maybe even if you're in certain medical fields. I'm not sure, I don't know enough about that. Okay, so in number 6, now what we're going to do is find out what page it is in number 7. If you're using an APA 6 manual, and if this is the first time you're taking the class, you're required to pick up the 7th manual. So don't buy an old 6th manual because you'll be out of date and you'll be getting into trouble with your faculty members. But in the 6th edition, on page 9, they start a list of the types of research that you might see. So let's have a quick look. Oh, great. So which page does it start on in this one? Where's the, do they have a, did they change the title? Okay. Oh, they expanded that a lot. On page 4. On page 4 in the new 7th edition, and it looks like they've expanded it quite a lot to discuss the difference between quantitative and qualitative, which we will get to in a couple of weeks. But when you're looking for type, then if data is collected, if it's unique, original data is collected, it's going to be an empirical study. Okay. Then the question is it a basic or a applied study? So, there are other types of studies as well, as you'll see in the list. It could be a literature review, it could be a theoretical article, it could be a historical article, although they didn't have that in the list for the 6th edition, but they may have added it. I haven't seen that yet. But if it's empirical, which is what you would be doing for a thesis or a dissertation, it's what we are looking for the purpose statement and the annotated bibliography and the final presentation as we move through the course. So an empirical article means that I'm collecting, or I'm talking about collecting, data that is unique and that would fill a gap in the current research literature. All right? So then is it basic or applied? So the difference between basic empirical research and applied is that basic is typically done in a very controlled environment. All right? So it's often lab-based. It's sometimes quite an abstract question that someone just wants an answer to. They're not really thinking about how would I use this information. They just come up with a question and go, oh, I want the answer to this question. When we look at applied research is generally something to do with a group of people or a concept, a training concept, or it might be something that we're going to examine under a applied or a real-world situation rather than in a lab. It may be something that you've read about that was originally done in a lab, but you look at that and you go, oh, I really am interested to see how that relates to my actual training, right? So it could be something where people have collected data on athletes who are running on a treadmill with a spirometer on, but the environment is controlled, the treadmill is controlled. What really happens when you transfer that and try to collect that data on athletes who are out running around a track in all kinds of different weathers or running in a race, right? So that would be the difference between the two. Okay? And as I said, it looks as though they have expanded this section and added a description of quantitative and qualitative research. We'll come back and look at that in more detail once we've got through the library information. Okay, so plagiarism, big ugly word, you should be concerned about it, okay? If you are found to plagiarize deliberately, then at best that will get you an F in a class. At worst it could get you dismissed from graduate school. Okay, so this is a pretty serious idea to take on board. The consequences of plagiarizing are much, much heavier than they would have been when you were an undergrad, in most undergrad programs, okay? So please review the graduate catalogue. There's information on plagiarizing from the view of the graduate school within the catalogue. In your APA manual, do we know what pages there is in the APA manual? Let's have a look. Is there APA? So that's too far, can't spell. Plagiarism. There we go. Okay, page 21 in the new book, and then page 254 to 257. All right, so the initial introduction is page 21, and then you want to look at page 254 to 257 for a description of plagiarism in your APA manual. So plagiarism can simply be considered as copying someone else's work, but it's a little more complicated than that when it comes to research. Because obviously if you and a friend do your homework together and you both hand in the same piece of homework and it's identical, that's plagiarizing. One of you copied off the other one, right? The problem when we start looking at summarizing research and using research within a paper is that it's not so much a question of copying, although sometimes it is, but mostly it's not a question of I read a paper and a student has cut and paste a block of a research paper or a textbook and put it in their work and said, okay, I wrote this. All right, that does happen, but that's rare. More often what happens is that you use an idea that you've read about in a research paper and you forget to cite the paper, all right? So that's not necessarily deliberate, but it's ethically incorrect in research. If I say young children are sedentary for 80% of the preschool day in full-time daycare, that's great, and it's accurate, but I didn't find that out, right? I read that somewhere else. So it's my job to make sure that I cite the place that I got that information from. I can use that information, all right? Especially when I synthesize it or I reword it, I don't just copy it, all right? Try not to get into the habit of using quotes. That's bad writing, okay? Unless you absolutely have to avoid using quotes, okay? But if you take that idea from something you've read, you have to tell the reader where you found that information, all right? That's just polite, and that's the professional way to approach it, all right? So it takes a lot of time to get the hang of this idea, all right? It is not as straightforward as it sounds. Once you start writing, you're like, oh, do I cite that? Do I cite, how many times do I cite it? All right, what if I read it and read it and read it and read it, and then 2 weeks later I write a paper and I forget that it came from something I read. Now I think, because it's in here now I think it's my idea, right? So there are a lot of tripping points to this skill, okay? In my view, as a faculty member, I would much prefer that you oversight than undercite, because I can go through and go, no, you didn't need to say that there because you had it in the previous sentence, all right? But that's something you want to check with every faculty member, because different instructors have different ideas about that concept. All right. Again, if you have any questions at all, always ask. You do not want to get accused of plagiarizing, people. Okay? So if you're in any doubt about something you're doing, check in with me. Okay, APA. All right, so APA is a formatting manual. Depending on your background in undergraduate, you may have had some introduction to the APA formatting, or you may come from a field that used a different formatting manual. So if you come from biology or business, their formatting manuals are different, okay? We, in our field, use APA, everybody uses it. I have to use it if I write a paper or I do a conference presentation. A lot of the articles we're going to read come from APA manuals. Some of them don't, so some of the articles we're going to read during the semester will not be APA formatted. That doesn't mean you don't have to APA format the stuff that you're reading, okay? And APA is a bit of a bugbear, to be quite frank. It's a pain in everybody's behind. It never really gets any better. Doesn't matter how long you do this for. Don't try to learn most of it. Some of it you will learn because you'll do it over and over again, like how to format a reference. Okay, by the end of the semester, you'll have a pretty good hang of how to write a reference. And you might not have to look it up every time. But don't even try to learn it. Just get into the habit of using the manual all the time. Reference the manual for everything. All right? There are rules for everything. Where do you put a period? Okay? In the new manual, by the way, there's only one space. Gone back to one space. Yes. Instead of 2 spaces. It's just... But that at least puts it in line now with the reference. Now everything is 1 space after a period. In the 6th edition, we have 1 space after a period for referencing, but 2 spaces for everything else. So that was a ridiculous rule in the first place. So now we're back to one space after a period. All right. How do you format a statistical piece of information? All all right? When do I shorten something? So if it's 5 hours, do I write hours or can I shorten hours to HRS? Right? You have to check the manual. Do I write 5 or do I have to write out 5? You have to check the manual. Right? Things like that are important because that means you're paying attention to detail. And to be a good grad student, you have to pay attention to detail. As far as I'm aware, they still want double spacing. So everything should be double spaced except what we're going to do in the template, and I'll come back to that. In edition 6, you had to use Times New Roman 12 point, and that is one of the things. Then they're going to be much more flexible on fonts. So now you can use Calibre 11, Arial 11, Lucinda Sans Unicode 10. You can still use Times New Roman 12 and Georgia 11. Now, I'm actually quite surprised about that because they're going to start letting you use fonts that are not serif, which is interesting because it's generally accepted that serif fonts are easier to read because you've got the little tails on the letters. We'll see how that goes. I would say stick with Times New Roman 12 point. It's simple. The only problem will be unless you're clever enough to know how to alter a new document in Word, and I'm not, you have to format a Word document because it comes up in something other than Times New Roman. The other thing you want to be careful for in Word is that Microsoft has decided that lines are 1.5 spaced instead of double spaced. So the easiest way to get around that is just to type the whole document, select all, and double space. As far as I know. And as I said, I'm clearly not very technologically advanced. So, you know, as I said, don't waste time trying to learn APA format. Take the book with you. If you are traveling and you have a deadline while you're away, make sure that the manual is one of the things you take with you, as well as your laptop. You will not be able to remember all the rules. And, you know, we just have to keep checking all the time. I still have to look things up all the time, right? So it's just part of life in grad school. Okay, so again, I'm not going to keep bothering to check this. These page numbers are for edition 6. Right, so they're going to be different. My understanding from my cheat sheet is that they will be longer because there are many, many more examples of references. So you want to look for 2 things in the new edition. One, you want to find the block of info that tells you the rules, so you can actually go through line by line on your reference. Section by section, what's the rule for the authors? What's the rule for the year? What's the rule for the title? Okay? And then there will be a big section that gives you actual examples. Right? This is important to pay attention to because how you format a reference depends on the type of media it is. All right? So how you format a research article is not the same as how you format a textbook, all right? Or how you would format a newspaper article or a podcast. Not that you'll be allowed to use podcasts very often, all right? If at all in the other classes, but certainly not in this class, okay? Some of the references italicized, some of it isn't italicized, all right? So as I said, you just have to use a ruler if you need to. I have to, right? Use a ruler, find the example or find the rules and just go through bit by bit and make sure. Because if you miss out a comma or a period, that's an error, right? And errors add up and end up losing you points. So be as careful as you possibly can. If you do it in a rush, you'll get it wrong. If you type it into a cheat software online, right? Because the software tells you, oh, you give us the reference and we'll APA format it for you, they get it wrong. And if you trust them, you get it wrong, right? So don't. Just use your manual. That's the best way to do it. Plus, you need to learn how to do it, right? It's like anything else. If I take a shortcut, I don't learn the skill, right? So learn the skill for yourself. Okay, so one of the things I want you to start thinking about as we start reading research, all right, is the next kind of assignment that you have once we've done these article summaries, okay? You need to be thinking about a problem that you're interested in, okay? And we are going to create a purpose statement from that problem, all right? It has to be something that is unique. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to come up with a brand new research idea. It might mean that you find some research on Chinese people, right? Because there's a lot of Chinese researchers who publish in English journals now. Sometimes the reading is a little hard on those because the English isn't great. But so you find some research that this group have done on a population in China, and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. Let's see what else I can find. And when you start looking, you can't find a similar piece of research on a different population, right? Well, that could be a research project, right? I'm going to use this idea, but I'm going to run it on a Hispanic population in Southwest America and see whether we get different results from this population than from the Chinese population. That's valid because it's unique, right? Unique doesn't have to mean new. It means no one else has done it, right? Again, if you have questions about that, please ask, because that is a typical issue in the class. Why people don't do as well as they would like to is that they find something they're interested in and they spend a lot of time researching that, but we already know the answer to that, and that's why they can spend a lot of time researching it, right? And get papers and papers and papers and papers that prove their idea, right? Well, then we already know the answer. That isn't a purpose statement, okay? And we'll talk about the difference between a quantitative statement and qualitative research is slightly different. They tend to have a question rather than a purpose. But what I don't want you to worry about whether your research is quantitative or qualitative. Start thinking about what you're interested in. Then we will decide whether it's quantitative or qualitative, okay? It needs to be feasible, so it's got to be doable. And that means doable given the resources we have access to. We are not a D1, we are not a research one. We don't have a lot of money and we don't have a lot of equipment, although we do have quite a bit, right? So is it doable given the resources you have access to? Is it original, unique, right? Does it fill a hole? Is it something we don't know the answer to yet? Okay. Don't worry so much about it being significant. That is more important once you move on to a PhD program. Okay? And we'll help you with this. All the faculty will help. You know, if you have a sports admin type idea and you want to run it by Dr. Yun first before you submit it to me, he'll help you, right? I don't know anything about sports admin, sport management, right? Sport finance, diddly squish. So I can help you with how to phrase it, but I can't tell you whether or not you have a unique question. He can. Okay? So use your resources. Oops, I keep pressing the wrong button. Okay, now, for the moment, I'm going to assume that your question is more quantitative in order to explain this idea, okay? When we are doing research, we have a variable or a factor that we're interested in, all right? So for quantitative, that's called the dependent variable, or the DV. It's the variable of interest, all right? So in my example here, we've said change in strength, all right? Does the person I'm working with get stronger? The independent variable is the thing that I am messing around with. I'm manipulating to see whether or not it changes strength, right? So in this example, that would be the training program. Maybe I'm looking at training program A versus training program B. Which one of those produces the largest change in strength? Okay, so the training program would be the independent variable. That's the thing I'm manipulating. And the strength gain is the dependent variable, the thing I'm interested to find out about. All right? The more you read, the more you'll be able to start identifying these for yourselves within the paper as you're reading it. Okay? If it's a quantitative problem, you have to be able to identify the IV and the DV within the purpose statement. Right? They've got to be in there. So when you're thinking about your problem, what is the thing you're interested in? What is the thing you want to do to see if it changes anything? Right? Or you might want to do a questionnaire, right? You might want to send a questionnaire out and ask people to fill in boxes, okay? And then find out what do they think about this thing after some time later. Send out another questionnaire, perhaps, right? There's all different ways of running this, okay? For the purpose of this class, all right, your question can only have one dependent variable and preferably only one independent variable, although I will let you go to two if it's necessary, right? If taking one of them out kind of makes the question less interesting. The more variables you have, the more complicated things become. That's why we put these boundaries on here, all right? Because if you have loads of dependent variables, the statistical analysis is very complicated. That's never a good plan, right? We want to keep statistics as simple as possible, all right? And it also means that you've got to do a lot more reading and pull a lot more resources in to what you're trying to create, all right? So one DV preferably one ivy. Okay. Again, if you have questions, please put them up in the discussion board, which I will, while I'm loading the film tonight, I'll create the discussion board, and you can ask me any questions, okay? So, my next plan, if this is relatively clear, is it? We only have Linda today. I don't know what happened to Jasmine. Oh, you know what? I think they're on the road.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe they're.
I think they're playing. Okay. So my next plan then is to go through this article summary idea, all right, and explain that as thoroughly as I can, so that people are a little less concerned about that, and we don't have anyone dialed in live. That's good. Okay. Does it need to be bigger than that, Linda?
A little bit.
Is that good? Okay. Let me just check this camera is actually running. Yes. Oh, and the battery hasn't run out. Hurrah, hurrah. Okay. All right. So I put a note in the header here just to remind some of you and let others of you know, APA requires double spacing, but from a grading point of view, I want this article summary on one page, because otherwise it becomes a nightmare of paper and flipping around in a Word document, and it's just too much aggro. So for this assignment, for these article summaries, you are not going to double space, okay? But when we transfer the article summaries into an annotated bibliography, you have to remember then that now you're APA formatting, because it's a paragraph format, and that has to be double spaced, okay? So, article summary, this week will be practice, put your name on. So if I print them out, I don't get them muddled up, but I'll try and do them electronically. The reference, so here you are going to put in an APA style reference. So what we were talking about earlier this evening, okay? You're going to go find the rules, and you're going to find the examples, and you're going to APA format the title and the authors and everything of the paper for the practice. Okay? In each row, you are only allowed 2 lines. Okay? So 2 lines here, 2 lines here, 2 lines here, 2 lines here. There's a reason for this, because there's a limit to the number of words that you're allowed. Okay? So, by only putting 2 lines in each box, you almost certainly will not go over your word limit. Okay? Unfortunately, because it's a table format, it will let you just keep typing merrily away within 1 row and just keep increasing the size of the row. So you have to pay attention. When you've done 2, go down to the next box, right? And do 2 more, go down to the next box. Right? So, APA formatted reference of the title, the authors, the year, all the stuff that's in an APA reference. For the article, if you haven't looked at it yet, is it's this one. Yes. Early phase resistance training strength gains in novice lifters are enhanced by doing static stretching. Way too long a title. However, okay. Type of article should be ringing a bit of a bell because we already looked in the APA manual at a subheading that was type of article. Right? So go to your APA manual, have a look at the list of types of articles and make a decision. What type is this article?
Just this one doesn't have the empirical.
Must do.
It's, the only ones they have is theoretical. This one is not that. That we discussed.
Have they got it under quantitative? So how have they done?
That's why I was confused, like, oh, should
Okay, that's bizarre.
So can probably you put, like, maybe it's article?
Maybe.
That's gonna come.
Have a go. Let me think about that. Somewhere in that manual they must talk about empirical and applied and basic. I'd be very surprised if they don't, but I'm still waiting. I ordered a desk copy and it hasn't arrived, so I'm still waiting for my 7th edition.
Because I even checking the contents, but that's how
There's nothing. Is there anything in the back?
And that's the thing that I was struggling with for a while.
Yeah. Well, and what I might do is just either remove that line or give everybody the points for it. So have a go.
Yeah.
It's not in there, so they've changed the
So
language. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Then they probably want you, instead of calling it an empirical article, I suspect they want you to decide whether it's quantitative or qualitative.
Because it talks about that more than it does.
Yeah. All right. I'll get back to you on that idea. Okay. Purpose statement. All right. So I said you can't plagiarize. Now I'm going to break my own rule. Okay. In 2 cases in this template, I want you to actively copy what you read in the article. All right, this is one of them. Okay, you are going to find the one sentence in the article. It's usually either right at the beginning of the introduction or right at the end of the introduction, but not always. Okay, one sentence that tells you what the purpose of this article was. Now, sometimes they make it really easy and say, our purpose for running this research was, right? Which is very helpful. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they use the word a, or they'll say, we plan to discover, right? So find something that basically tells you the author's reason for wanting to run the study. What was the question that they had? Okay, that goes here. The next box down only has 0.5 of a point for a reason. This is pretty tricky. Okay, takes a lot of practice. The research design, sometimes it's called the research method, is the plan for data collection. Right? So this is, you're looking for information that tells you, so ahead of going out and collecting the data, they sat down and they said, okay, if this is the question, then we have to collect data at point A, point B, point C, or maybe we're just going to send out a survey to answer this question. Okay? So you're looking for the plan to collect the data. So it could be a questionnaire, or it could be they collected data at the beginning, they ran an intervention, they collected data at the end. That's called a pre-post design. Right? Give it a go. Right? It's one of the reasons why we A, do a practice, and B, we do these article summaries before we get into the work that is worth a lot of points later in the semester. Because this is quite tricky. The more research you read, the more you'll get the hang of, oh yeah, they decided ahead of time they were going to do X, Y, Z, right? It's not what did they do, it's the plan for the data collection, right? When, how many times, those kinds of questions. The participants is usually relatively simple. And you want to go back to your purpose statement for the participant row, okay? Because you want to put the characteristics of the participants that made them valuable for this purpose, all right? And you want to keep, remember this is a summary, okay? So you want to keep this information tied to the purpose. And here's an example. The purpose might be which training program produces the most strength gains in basketball players, right? When you start reading, they start telling you that they used male and female basketball players, right? And maybe they used 50 male players and 35 female players. And so you start writing all this in your participant line. It's not that that isn't correct or that it isn't interesting, but it isn't their primary purpose. It's a secondary purpose to be able to look at the male results versus the female results. Okay? And this is a summary. So you've only got 300 words, right? Which is a lot of words for a summary. So that will get cut down as we get into later in the semester. All right? So your participants, you want to make sure that you don't get off track, putting down information that isn't directly relevant to the primary purpose. Okay? All right? So again, we've got 2 rows here. If you decide you need 3 rows, you have to steal a row from somewhere else in the template. You can't just add another row willy-nilly, right? Because I'm trying to constrain you to help you keep within this 300-word limit. Okay? The 300 words does not include the reference. It's just the summary portion. Right? Okay, so the next piece is procedures. Okay? So the procedures, sometimes called the methods, I just don't want to get you confused here. All right? So we're going to call it procedures. The procedures is the what did they do? A step-by-step, like a recipe, right? They did this, they did this, they did this, they did this, right? If they used a piece of equipment, which piece of equipment did they use? Because the manufacturer might be important. If they use an accelerometer, you can't just say they used an accelerometer, because someone who's reading your summary might be looking for a piece of research that is specifically using a certain type of accelerometer, right? So, recipe goes in here. What did they do? Point by point by point by point. Okay? All right, the data analysis is the statistical analysis that was run on the data they were collecting in the procedures, on the variables that are listed in the purpose statement. It is not the type of software they use to run the data analysis, because the software is irrelevant in a summary, right? Because all the software packages have their own algorithms and whatever, but they would all come out with the same answer because in the old days we hand calculated statistics. Right? So this is, you're looking for maybe a repeated measures ANOVA, or you're looking for a t-test, or you're looking for, let's see what else. I hope I haven't picked any that are only descriptive statistics, because that would be bad news. You're looking for the alpha or the p-value, right? You won't understand this stuff unless you've had a stats class or you did some research as an undergrad, right? But you can find it. It's the statistical analysis, okay? Go online, Google statistical analyses, and it'll give you some idea. Or even better, go to the library and get a stats book out. And that will tell you the kind of terminology you're looking for to go in here. The alpha and the p-value, is probably going to be 0.05, but it might not be. All right, and I'll explain 0.05 later in the semester when you've done more reading. The results. Okay. You want to report the results of the statistical analyses you listed here that directly relate to the variables in the primary purpose. Okay? So if they start waffling on about the male basketball players and the female basketball players, that is not stuff you necessarily need in here unless you've only got 230 words and you have some word spare and you want to include it, then that's okay, right? But try to be disciplined, report the results of the stats you reported in the above section that directly tie to the variables in the primary purpose, okay? Don't get carried away. And you'll see again, it's 0.5, so the sections where I think this is going to be quite difficult until you have a lot of practice. They don't have a lot of points attached to them, right? The things that I think if you're paying attention and you're doing what I asked, you should be able to find this, they have a few more points, okay? Conclusion. All right, this is the second point where you are allowed to copy and paste for this class. All right? Find one sentence that defines what the authors think they found tied to the primary purpose. All right? Usually, it will either be in the discussion. Some journals actually have a conclusion subheading at the end,